Hi everybody, this is Joe/FoozleCC, and I've been doing a lot of videos recently on 3D inside of Construct 3. And this video is going to continue on that theme. We're going to cover a specific plugin that's been made by Mikal/kindeyegames. It's his 3D object plugin, and it allows us to import GLTF models into Construct 3, which is awesome. It lets us use much more complicated geometry than the 3D shape currently allows, and it also allows us to have animations that come with that GLTF model so that we can have characters that are fully three-dimensional running around, jumping, walking, attacking, any animation that you can imagine. Well, now you can bring it on in. Now, there is some performance limitations in terms of, don't think that you can have, hundreds of these characters all running around that are super highly detailed, right? Construct 3 is still a 2D game engine at its heart, but it is allowing us to strategically use these 3D assets inside of our games and make some really cool things with it. I, about a month ago, participated in the Xander Jam 5, and I made a game called Time Defense, where I tried to really push this to the limit inside of a mini game, and boy did I run into a lot of things that I just didn't know how to do. I'm used to working in a 2D game engine, so there was a lot of things I had to ramp up on just to be able to make use of the plugin. And this video, I hope to share a number of different elements related to that learning experience so that you guys have a jump start when you're trying to figure out, well, how do I go from sprites and sprite sheets to a GLTF model that I'm using inside of Construct 3 with this plugin. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump on over to the agenda of what we're going to cover. All right, so the very first thing that we're going to go through is the overall 3D object plugin itself. I'll show you real quick where you can get it from itch. We're going to talk about what is GLTF. You have to know about Blender. It's most likely the tool that you're going to use. There are other tools, but they cost money. We're going to talk about where you can get some models. We're going to talk about some import-export challenges. We're going to talk about some of the nuances that we need for the plugin and how we overcome them as it relates to having a single texture. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can check your model and play with it in C3 and some performance considerations. So let's jump on over to itch and where you can get the actual plugin itself. Okay, so at itch, over here, I'll put the link down below along with a bunch of other links. This is where you're going to go and get your plugin. Now, Mikal has done a ton of work on this, and he has released a bunch of additional updates as he's been developing this plugin, and continues to add more and more features to it. Most recently, he's added the ability to blend animations from one animation to the next, so it doesn't just all of a sudden switch. It actually does a lerp to blend the animations together, which is really cool. He also allows for a number of different actions inside of the C3 runtime itself that you can use in your event sheets to easily set some things that you need to. But this is where you're going to go and download it. There is some information here that if you read through it, it will help you at a very basic level understand what this thing is. And it does come with a C3P file that you can use to understand the basics. And we're going to open that up right now, which is this GLTF animation test. Okay, so inside of the GLTF animation test, this is what you open it up to. Let's go ahead and give this a play. With one exception, I imported this model. This is what you will see. But let's go ahead and give this a play with both of those inside of the scene here, the layout. So coming on in, you've got two characters, right? And this is awesome. I mean, you can set the different animations that you would like for them to play. This is just a little demo here. You can change the speed of the animation itself, right? You can make it slow, you can make it fast, you can make it normal. You can pause the animation, unpause. Inside of the event sheet, if you come over here, you'll see, some basics of, hey, there's this condition for 3D object onloaded that you'll want to use for some initialization. There's some ways to set the animation that you want to play. If you open this up and take a look at the actions associated here, this is what you've got. You've got pause, play, set animation rate, set the speed, change your local center, which can be useful to correct for something that you imported that has a weird center. You can do a handful of different things here, but some of the key things is changing your rotation and also being able to set your animations. That's what this thing is mainly about from an action perspective. If you come in on the conditions, you have is the animation finished and on finished as a trigger. That's a really important trigger. You're going to want to use this when you are setting up your state machines, right? This is similar to when you have your state machine of on attack 1 finished, set it to idle. You're going to do something similar here, right? So that's an important one, as well as the onloaded trigger. And you can also check if it's loaded and if it's finished. So those are your conditions. And then similarly, I think there's some basic expressions that are available to round it out. So that's the plugin, that's the overview. And you can jump right into this and start using it, and that's great. However, I ran into some big walls when trying to leverage models that I found online, understand how I can create models, how do I export it correctly so I can bring it into here, and what are all the nuances. A couple other real quick things inside of the layout just to finish this part of the video off. If you look here, when you created the 3D object itself, it actually has the image editor here, and you need to import the texture that your model is going to use. And this is important because you have to use one texture. So if your model that you are working with has multiple files, and you'll see that a lot of models will have like a normal, and maybe there's multiple parts that each have their own base color for the diffuse, you need to figure out how to get that into one, and we'll talk about that. So that's this part. And then in the properties over here, you have to point to the GLTF that you have imported inside of your files. So, you know, you're going to come in here, you're going to import, you're going to drag your GLTF in, and you got to point it, and then that's how it all works. All right, so we've got the plugin. Well, what is GLTF anyways? Let's go to Wikipedia. It is the Graphics Language Transmission Format, or the GL transmission format. And it's I guess a common standard way of producing 3D models that are able to be shared on the web. There's a lot more information if you would like to go into it at chronos.org, where they have a number of standards and specifications related to this. For our purposes, what we need to know is inside of Blender, I can export something called a GLTF embedded with the ability to then import that into Construct 3. So that's what we need, is a GLTF embedded. There's like binary and embedded. We need embedded. Okay, so how do we make models? Well, we're going to use Blender. Blender is most likely the tool that you should be using. It's free and it has tons of tutorials. When you open up Blender or download it and open it up, it gives you this default cube. This is not going to be an in-depth Blender tutorial. The basics of just moving around, I can change, you know, in the editor by holding down the mouse middle button. I can move it around, right? I can grab it with G. After I select it, I can grab it and move it around. I can move it on the X, Y, or Z axis. Escape to cancel it. I can scale with S, right? And I can rotate with R. And I can also do that on the X, Y, and Z, etc. That's the basics. However, you're going to want something more complicated than a cube. We actually already have a cube with 3D shape. So this is when you would go and watch lots of tutorials and start learning how to model something. If you're like me and have, I'll say, poor 3D modeling skills as it relates to creating characters that are animated and everything else, you're probably just going to want to go and buy one or find free ones. So let's talk about that. So where do I get these models? CG Trader and TurboSquid are two marketplaces with lots and lots and lots of 3D models. You can go there, set up your account, go ahead and download them. They normally will come across as an FBX file type, and we'll talk about how to import that in a second. You also might want to use the Unity Asset Store. And just because it's on the Unity Asset Store doesn't mean that you can't get it into Construct 3. In fact, most of the models that I have access to have come from the Unity Asset Store. They often have big old bundles that you can get a bunch of assets for not that much money. That's what I look out for, and I'll go and I'll spend, you know, $25, $30, and it will be normally something that might have cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars, but they have a big bundle together. So look out for those bundles and know that through the method I'm going to show you, you can get the models down and into Construct 3. Now know though that there are tricks to getting it from that file to a GLTF embedded with a single texture. Okay, so let's talk about the Unity Asset Store before we go on to Sketchfab, and we're going to go through an example of how to do that. Okay, so here we are in the Asset Store, and this is the model that we're going to go through and use in our example today. I got it as part of an overall bundle, and like I said, normally this is $10, but this was included in a big bundle that had lots of stuff in it. But this is what we're going to use. But when you come in here and eventually you buy this thing and it's now in your My Assets section, this part you do need to open up Unity in order for this to work. There is an excellent tutorial from Games from Scratch, which is basically what I'm going through right now. I'll link that down below. I'm going to skip to just the sections that are pertinent for us in Construct 3, but the basics of it come from that tutorial. And we're going to make use of a awesome tool called this Unity package extractor in order to actually get this to work for us, which is the tool that Games from Scratch references as well. All right, so once you have that in your My Assets folder, you do need to open up Unity. You have to download it if you don't have it. You have to create a project, and the bare minimum that you have to do is you have to go to the Window Package Manager, open this up, find the asset in there, and download it. That's all you have to do. Once it's downloaded, you can close Unity, you're done with it. That's what you have to do. So make sure you do that and then go on to the next step. Okay, so in the next step, you have to go and find where that has been downloaded. Well, when you hit that download button, it puts it onto your machine, and you can find that by going to your app data, roaming, Unity, asset store -5.x, and then if you go to that, you actually see the names of all of the publishers that you have downloaded. This one was underneath Dungeon Mason. Come in here, and I think it's under Creatures, and here we go. I've got my Evil Dragon Pack, HP, Unity package. Well, what do I do with that? It's a Unity package. Well, we're going to use that extractor tool. So let's go ahead and copy it on over to a temp folder on our C drive, and we'll go from there. Okay, so now I've copied it over to a temp folder on my C drive. I have to go and download that extractor tool, and I'm going to put it right in here, and we're going to do the next step. Okay, so I've downloaded it. It's in my folder. Let's go ahead and unzip it. After unzipping it, I'm going to move it to the same folder itself. So now I've got this extractor.exe, and I've got my Unity package all in the same folder. The next thing that we have to do is we have to open up the command prompt and run a command. So in order to do that, go ahead and hit Windows R, CMD, open that up, go ahead and change your directory, CD, to the temp folder. Now that you're in temp, we can go ahead and extract it. I'm going to go ahead and rename this to something short so that it's easier to type in. I'm just going to call it Dragon. I'm actually just going to copy that, come back to the command prompt. Let's type in extractor.exe, and I believe I can just do this. Let's see if that works. Okay, now it's finished. So that worked. So we had to type in extractor.exe and then the name of the file, and it goes through and extracts everything into this folder that it just created called Assets. You come on here, 4 Evil Dragons, HP, and here we go. We've got animations, animators, materials, mesh, prefab scene, texture, and for the most part, what we're going to need is, if you go into the mesh, it's got the 4 dragons here, right? And that's great. We could bring that in and convert that into a GLTF and export it, and it would work. But you wouldn't have the animations, you'll find out, because of how this particular set of files are set up. And this is, I think, pretty common from what I've seen. If you come in here and under animations, let's go to the Nightmare. You see all the animations organized as separate FBXs. So we need to figure out how to get the animations from those FBXs all into the same single GLTF for it to work nicely inside of Construct 3. And we're going to show you how to do that inside of Blender. I think we're also in this one probably going to run into the issue, and we'll see, of multiple bodies with probably different textures. Let's see here if they've got different textures. Okay, so thankfully this one has a single texture for the entire asset. But sometimes you'll see multiple bodies with different textures, and then you have to bake all those to a single texture. And later on in the tutorial, I'm going to pull up a different model so we can go through that. But let's stick with this one to see how do we merge all those different animations into a single model inside of Blender that we can then export for the GLTF. Before we go on with our example of the dragon that we just did, I did want to point out one other source that you can get models from, which is Sketchfab. And Sketchfab is an awesome site that has lots of community-driven assets that people can post up there and make it royalty-free with, you know, some Creative Commons license, right? So if you come over here into Sketchfab, you can find all sorts of different models that you can filter down and even find ones that are animated and ones that will be able to work inside of your game. You can download it right from here, but there's a better solution. If you search for the Sketchfab Blender plugin on Google, you'll find it. Come back into Blender, go to your preferences, go under add-ons and hit install and install that plugin. And then over here, if you hit N, you'll see this pop out here. So N opens and closes this. The letter N is a hotkey. You'll see this Sketchfab tab. You go ahead and you log in, and now you can search for that same model that you just found in here. Click on it. I was just playing around with this one, and you can import it, and it will be a much cleaner import process, and it's a lot faster. So if you are using Sketchfab, you can do that and bring it on into here. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue on. Okay, so we're going to go back to the dragon example, and I'm going to talk about something here. The FBX import, that's the default for Blender. If we come in here and we do File, Import FBX, it's not perfect. Sometimes it has issues, and you will be like, oh crap, like I just bought this. I mean, I can't figure out how to open it. And I mean, Blender's a free tool. It's under development, but there is a solution, but it costs money. There is a plugin or an add-on for Blender that's literally called Better FBX Importer / Exporter. I will provide a link to this page down below. And by this page, this is the page that I'm going to link you to. This is where you can get it on the Blender market. It's $28, but it's a pretty awesome tool. So if you need it, you need it. I mean, Blender's free, but I mean, this thing costs money to make it, you know, work with FBX more completely. I found it fixed a lot of my issues, so I would recommend it. So coming back into Blender, now that we know about that add-on, I'm going to use that to import my dragon model. So you come down here, after you install the add-on, remember you have to do that, you'll see this Better FBX Importer. So let's go ahead and use it. So this is the folder for our 4 evil dragons or whatever that we had, right? And the first thing I need to do under this part of the video, I want to figure out how do I merge all those animations into one blend file so that we can export a dragon with all those animations attached. So if you come in here to animations, let's use the nightmare as an example. You've got all these that are available. We're just going to do a few to demonstrate the concept rather than going through all of them because it does take some time. If you come in here under basic attack, let's do basic attack, idle, and run or something. So basic attack, let's go ahead and import it. Actually, let's go ahead and continue to import. I think we can import, yes, I think we can import all 3 at the same time. So let's go ahead and select this. We did basic attack. Let's get idle and run. So if we come in here, import those as well. You're going to see that we're going to have 3 armatures here that have been brought in. We don't need the camera and the light for what we're doing. And I'm going to come in here and under the animation, under take 1, I'm going to rename this to something that I like that makes more sense to me. This was attack, and under armature 001, I'm going to rename this to, let's just see what this is. Okay, that is idle. You can see by what's highlighted that I can just tell that that's the idle animation. So let's change this to idle. And that means that this should probably be run. Yep, that's run. Okay, so let's rename this to run. Okay, so I've got attack, idle, and run. And I've got all these extra meshes and I just want one dragon with those 3 animations, and they're organized right now as all separate things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a file save as, and I'm going to save this as like a starting blend file. So you can see I've actually already done this a couple times when I was tinkering with it before. So let's just call this starting blend. And go ahead and save. And now I'm going to go and create a new blend file, and we're going to do something different here. So let's go ahead and hit new, general. Let's delete our starting cube. Let's import, instead of the animations, what we're going to do is we're going to import the mesh itself in that separate folder that we saw. So inside of our folder structure, if you come down under mesh, you'll see, I think we were using Soul Eater? I think we were using Nightmare. Let's go ahead and open this up. Let's import this. Yes, we were. Okay. So this is the one that we want, right? Now, if you look, there's no animations inside of this. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to import those other animations, just the animations, by doing something called append. So if you go to File and you go into Append, we're going to go and navigate back to our folder here where we saved that, and we called it Starting Blend. Let's go ahead and hit Append, and we get to pick what we want to append. And if you go underneath Action, you'll see that you can append these 3 actions. Let's go ahead and do it. Okay, did it work? I don't see anything happening. Well, let's go and see how we can associate those actions now to this armature. So we've got our armature selected here. Let's come over to this, and instead of timeline, let's change it to the dope sheet, and let's change this then to the action editor. And now, because we imported those 3 actions, you should see them here. And let's start with idle. There we go. Boom, it works. And let's go ahead and do this button here called push down. And when you do that, if you come back over here to armature, you'll see now that there's this animation thing and this NLA track, and you'll see idle. So what we can then do is go to each of these. So we did idle. Now let's go to run. Let's push this down. Yep, that looks good. And let's go to attack and push that down. There we go. So now we've got idle, run, and attack. Now this has, if we change on our viewport shading from solid, which was like the gray, to the material preview. Okay, so here we go. Yeah, this actually doesn't have a texture associated with it yet, so we have to fix that. Under the material properties, you'll see, okay, what's going on here? I've got this Lambert thing. Well, let's go ahead and open up just another window here real quick, and let's change this to the shader editor. And you can see that there's nothing feeding the base color of the BSDF under Lambert 1, which is what this is. So add search, and I think it's just called image texture. That should work. Let's do this. And for this, what we want to do is we want to open up one of the textures from the folder that we downloaded. Let's go back to our folder structure. Let's come to textures, and under, I think we said this was Nightmare. Let's do green. It's a few options here. So let's open up this image. And when you do this, we're going to drag this to the base color, and this should work. There we go. We got a green dragon. All right. So we got our green dragon here, and it's got the 3 animations on it. So we're now ready to export this thing. Now, this situation, we got a little lucky in that it was a single painted texture just ready to go. In some instances, like I said, some instances, you have to do a whole sequence of baking it onto a single texture. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But let's go ahead and go through the export of this and at least show it inside of Construct 3 before we can continue on with the rest of the tutorial. So come down here under File, Export. You're going to go to GLTF. And you want to select, instead of binary, it needs to be embedded. And that's what's going to work with the Construct 3 plugin. And you want to make sure that under Geometry, you come to Materials, and just select no export. And what that does is that green dragon texture file that we put in there, it doesn't need to be inside of the GLTF because it's just going to increase the file size, because we're already going to have to manually attach that to the 3D object inside of Construct 3. So you're just inflating the memory of the file unnecessarily. So select no export, and let's go ahead and put this in here, and we're going to call this green dragon and export it. Okay, so now it's exported. Let's go into Construct 3 and see if it works. Okay, so we're back in the editor. I'm just going to change this object here to be the one that we want. So let's come down to the files, and let's go ahead and import our GLTF, which we can find our green dragon file. Let's just drag that in. Boom. Hit import. So we've got green dragon GLTF. Let's come over here. Let's update the name of this to green dragon.gltf. And if we were to hit play, this is going to look all goofy because it's still using the tile or the texture for that previous model. Let's go ahead and drop in our green dragon texture that we also have. So coming back over here, you open up texture. Let's go to Nightmare. Let's make it the green guy. Let's drop that in. And there we go. Now, one thing to note is this is a 2048 by 2048. We probably don't need it to be above 512 and 512, and that's going to significantly cut down the overall image memory. So let's go ahead and change this to 512. Hit OK, and close it. Now, the other thing, though, you have to know is if you make that 512 inside of the overall project properties, the max sprite sheet size, you have to set this so that you can't go below what this max spreadsheet size. I think I'm saying that correctly. But anyways, you have to make sure that this is set in accordance with how you're setting that. So if you have an issue, just go and play with this, and this will fix it. All right, so let's go ahead and hit play and make sure that this works. Oh, yes, it does. Let's make it idle. All right, how about run? That is awesome. Now, it's not looping these. Inside of the event sheet, when you tell it to play, there's a checkbox that you can hit loop, and it will loop the animation. So this is awesome. We managed to go all the way in. Now, if the size is off, what you can do is you can come in here and let's make this like 0.3 and hit play again. And there you go. Now you got a smaller, more adorable green dragon. You'll note here that it didn't right away update this model. If you save it and then reopen the project, it'll look like a green dragon that next time. But I think in this editor instance, it's still using the previous data from. That's just how it's working currently. So anyways, we just went through the whole arc and we got a Unity Asset Store 3D model through Blender, exported the GLTF, and into Construct 3 with animations. That took me a really long time to figure out, so I was really happy when it worked for me, and I hope that this helps somebody out there. Speaking of which, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. It's free for you to do. It makes a big difference for me. Appreciate everybody's support. So let's keep going. If you come back here, I talked about the Blender, Better FBX import and export. Let's go on to how to bake to a single texture. I'm gonna hit pause on the video, go find an appropriate model because we got lucky with the dragon, and then we're gonna continue. Okay, so I went ahead and I picked out this model called Mecha Sally, and it's done by an artist. Looks like the name is Vidi2077. Link down below. But I went ahead and downloaded this. It has the situation that I was talking about where you have more than one base color. No matter how simple it is, as soon as it's two, you have a problem that you have to fix. So inside of Blender, I used the Sketchfab plugin. I searched, I imported, and this is what came up. So if I go ahead and I turn on the material preview here, you'll see that we've got Mecha Sally working, but let's go ahead and get another window here. And if you look at, instead of 3D viewport, come down here to the image editor is fine. you'll see that there's separate files for the arms versus the head. So how do we combine these two? This is what we're going to try to figure out. Let's see if we can do this. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the UV editor on this side, and we're going to be in object mode over here for now. And let's talk about a couple things. Okay, so when you come over here and you look at this exploded file tree, one of the things that we're going to have to do is we need to set up an environment for us to bake. And we need to bake it to a single texture. So instead of having these two separate ones, even though this is very simple, we need to put it all on the same one. Okay, so how we're going to do that? So inside of here, when you come to the object and you come down into this section here, which is called the object data properties, and you go to the UV maps, you have something called already here labeled UV map. We need to go through each of these and create something new. So let's go ahead and hit plus and let's rename it to bake. Okay, and we need to do that actually for each object. So let's go in here, let's name this bake, and you'll notice that there's this camera icon. That's just showing which one it's using when it's rendering. So it's still set to the other one, which is fine. Let's come over here, let's add another one, let's hit bake, let's add another one, bake, add another one, bake. Okay, I'm not sure what these things are. I don't think, I don't know what that one is, but either way, okay, let's just add a bake for this. So now I think we have a bake set up for each of the main objects inside of our scene, inside of Blender. Okay, so let's go ahead and go on into edit mode. Once you're in edit mode, go ahead and hit A again and just select all those. And let's go ahead and let's do U, Smart UV Project. Let's set this to 0.006 or something like that. That's going to give us some space around it. Let's hit OK. And let's see if that worked. Okay, so here we go. Now look at all this. If you zoom on in, you've got all these things laid out here, right? And this is an atlas, right? So we've got all of our meshes laid out here. And you might have many objects. You might only have a couple objects that you need to do this for. But now we've got a way to associate a single PNG file to the mesh. And you could paint over this now if you wanted to. You could do whatever. But we're going to do what's called a bake. So we're going to use the existing textures which are there inside of an environment with you know, lighting or whatever, and we're going to bake onto this. So let's go and do that now. So remember, inside of here we have these UV maps. We need to make sure that it's gray, aka selected on the bake for each of these. But that the camera is still the other one, because we're going to use that to bake onto the new one, if that makes sense. So let's go ahead and go back into object mode, and let's come over here and let's go into the shader editor. So if you can see here, sometimes it says arms and sometimes it says head, like for the head. What we need to do is we actually need to go through each of these and we need to duplicate what is there and so make sure it's selected to the bake all. So this is, let's go ahead and do Shift D and just place it somewhere. And you need to change this from that arms light base color to the bake all and just leave it selected. Now you have to do this for every single one, otherwise only for this object will it bake, if that makes sense. So now let's go to the next one. Shift D, bake all. Let's go to the next one. Shift D, bake all, and so on. Last one. There we go. All right, so now in each of these, the white here means it's selected. We've got our bake all image ready to go. So now we need to set up our environment for baking. If you come over here to the viewport shading and use rendered, the preview, now you get an idea of what the lighting looks like. So if we were to bake this, it would be pretty dark. So let's go into our world environment. Let's go ahead and just increase this a little bit so that things start to brighten up. All right, let's do something like this. Maybe even higher. And you also have this other light source that's right here. Let's go ahead and use G, and let's go up the Z axis. And let's raise this up. And as far as the light, let's change this from a point to a sun. Ooh, that's really bright. Maybe an area. And let's make the overall size of this to be like 10, 10, and let's increase it up a little bit more. You can take this and kind of point it however you want. Maybe increase the strength a little bit. All right, well, this is just an example. So you can make your lighting, you can put multiple lights in here, you can do it however you want. But this is now our environment that we're going to set up to bake. Okay, so head on over to the render properties. Make sure that your render engine is set to cycles. Also make sure that all of your objects are selected here before you hit bake. And a couple other things that we're going to want to do is underneath the bake itself, you see here the margin at 16. Let's make that smaller. This will prevent it from overlapping into the other meshes on the image itself. Let's just set this to like 2. And I believe that we can go ahead and hit bake. Now, if you didn't want lighting, like if you just wanted the diffuse, you could, select only diffuse or the bake type to be only diffuse, or you could pick certain things. You could bake normals doing this method, etc. But we're going to do combined because we just want to see kind of like what we see here, we kind of want to create. So let's go ahead and hit our bake and see what happens. Okay, so it's all done. Look at this thing. This thing's awesome, right? So congratulations, you've now baked a texture. Now you see that there's a lot of shading on this, right? And it's all dependent on how you put your lighting and everything else. And you might choose just to do diffuse if you're going for a more comic style look, right? But this is a way that you can set up different lighting scenes and create textures. Okay, so what you're going to do now is I would right away come over here. You see this asterisk? You're going to want to save this somewhere. And this is what we're going to load into Construct 3. So let's go ahead and save this. Okay, so I'm going to save this just as bake all. And now that's saved. Now, what we need to do before we go and export and just run off is, remember all those UV maps and the material settings, right, where we had done that Shift D? We have to now correct all that so that when we export it, it all works and it uses the new texture. So let's come on over here to each of our objects. Let's start with like the head. Make sure we can see what's going on here. And coming on down here to UV map, let's go ahead and switch this over to bake. Let's do that for each of our objects. That's actually, you can remove the original UV map. Let's come in here, remove the UV map. Let's come over here, remove that, and do it for all of them. And now let's come on over to, one more. Did I get them all? I think so. Let's come on over to the shader editor. Let's look at our materials. And instead of us using this base color for each of these, right? What we need to do is now hook up our material, which, let's just talk about this. You know what we should do? We should create let's just create a new material. This will be easier, I think. So let's go ahead and hit this button. Let's call this final material. And we're going to delete this. And let's change this over to bake all. And delete this. So we've got our bake all here. And now if we come over to our head, let's hope this works. And go over to materials, which is right here. Let's change this material from head to final material. And did that work? It doesn't really look like it, does it? So let's see what's going on here. Okay, I think we fixed it. Just by clicking over to the viewport shading to come back to material preview and retoggling it, it seems to have refreshed it. So there we go, it's working. So let's go ahead and do that for each of the properties here. Let's come down to the material, or for each of the meshes, and let's make sure it's final material. What is this? Trunk. Let's change this to final material, and do this for all of them. So come on in. Alright, so final material should be everywhere. Final material. And we have done it. Okay, so we have baked our texture onto our object, or onto our new image, and we've reset up our file so that it's calling out the right material with the right image. And what we can do now is we can export this thing and import it into Construct 3. Let's see if it works. So export GLTF. Let's come over to embedded. Geometry, we don't need to include the material. Let's call it mecha GLTF, and let's save it. All right, so now it's saved. Let's go into Construct 3 and see if it works. Okay, we're back in the editor. This time I'm going to replace the golem, but let's go ahead and load the file first. Let's come into Files, Import Files. Let's put what we just had into there. We've got our mecha. Let's put it in. Let's import. Let's double click on him. Let's change the texture over to what we baked. So this is the new texture that we're using. Let's go ahead and close this. Now he's going to look all goofy until it gets refreshed. Now let's change it to point to mecha.gltf, and let's hit play. So not working. Let's see what's going on there. Let me just clone this real quick. Is the scale way up? Oh, the scale is 2000. Let's change this to, like, I don't know, 1. Okay, so I went ahead and I cloned this object, and now it's showing up correctly. So let's just play with the scale a little bit. Let's change this to 10. Now, similarly, it's not refreshing. You know what? Let's just clone this, and I think that will allow us to see it in the editor. Let's see here. Yep, okay. It's letting us see it in the editor, and you can play with the rotations, but you hit play, and we've got our model in here, and it's working. Okay. That was complicated, but we managed to do it. Now, if you're really quick at Blender, you might have been able to find a faster way to do that, but that's kind of the basics. You need to figure out how to get a scene set up so that you can bake it to a single atlas/texture that then you can load into here. Now, one other thing I'm not going to go into depth onto, but with this character, what you could then do with your model, if you wanted to, is you could go to a great site called mixamo.com. I'm going to go there right now. Now, mixamo.com does require you to create an account and sign in, but once you do that, they have all of these great animations that you can actually apply to your character and download, which is awesome. Whew! All right, so we did it. So if you have a model with multiple textures, that's what you have to do in order to get it all the way into Construct 3. And that took me a long time to figure out. Now, let's talk about this. You've got your GLTF, but you want to make sure, or you want to do some debugging on it. There's a great website viewer, Babylon JS. If you go to their sandbox and you come over here and drag and drop your GLTF model in, I already did that for my other character here. It will immediately start playing, and you can do some things like how many indices or faces do I have, aka triangles, and you can start to understand and see your animations if they're coming through and what they're named as. So if you're writing your event sheet and you're like, oh, what was the name of that animation again? You can get a list through the expressions of the plugin, but this is a quick way to see. Now, these animations came from Mixamo that are on this character. I did exactly what I just told you. I took character, put it up on the Mixamo, and I went through and went ahead and applied all the ones that I wanted to, and I created this GLTF from it. So now I've got a character with, I don't know, 25 animations, which is great. And I can put that inside of Construct 3. All right, so that's Babylon. The other thing that you can do is literally open up your GLTF in a text editor. You can do that. So if you have something like Sublime, you can drag and drop in your GLTF and see what's kind of going on. If we take our green dragon example, for instance, and you drag that in, and now you can see this is exactly what is underlying the model. So let's go ahead and collapse this a little bit so you can see what is all here. But you've got some nodes, animations, meshes, skins, accessors, buffer views. Well, we know that we created 3 animations for this, so let's just see if it's here. Animations, and we've got run. Attack, idle, and run. There it is. So if you really want to go into the nuance of it, you can open it up in a text editor and see what's going on. All right. We've been playing with it in C3, but here are some things that you're going to find. You need to figure out how to incorporate it into your event sheets, right? And it's going to feel very similar to doing a state machine, right? But what I would suggest is keeping a instance variable on your character, which shows the current animation playing. That's just going to help you when you trigger your on animation finished. You can check, well, what was it playing and what should happen next. It's kind of like having a state variable on your character, right? You just want to use that. It's going to help you incorporating into your events. You will start to run into some performance issues if you have too many of these models in your game, depending on the amount of triangles that you have. So let's just look at what we did here with these 3. You can see here that I'm actually running at around 51%. This probably would normally be 60 FPS. I have a bunch of stuff open on my laptop right now, including video recording software. So that said, you will see that when you start to get up to that, I'm going to say 30-ish K triangles, you'll start to see maybe some frame rate hits, just depending on your machine. Like I said, this isn't meant to be like a full 3D engine where everything's optimized and your memory's optimized, but you're able to get some amount of models, depending on how many polygons or how detailed you're trying to keep these things, into Construct 3. Now, the last thing I want to show, just for awareness, is say you really got a great model and it's just too detailed and you want to figure out how do I make it smaller. You can make use of something called Blender Decimate. And let's go ahead and open up our dragon model and I'll show you that real quick. Okay, so we've got our model of our dragon open here and I just opened up the mesh. And if you come over to the modifier properties and go ahead and add Decimate, which is right here, what you can do is through this collapse selection, you can actually reduce the amount of faces. So we've got 2502 right now. So you can just start to play with this. Let's go to 0.9 and it, reduce it a little bit, and you'll see this start to lose some of its shape. Where if you go all the way down to 0, there's no faces or something like that, right? So let's go all the way down to 0.5. And it still has a pretty good shape of the overall dragon. Let's go down to something more like 0.1. Now this probably isn't going to look that great, right? It's a little bit too far, but still not too bad. And it's only using 403 faces now, which is fantastic because now all of a sudden your performance just went like this versus the starting 2500, especially when you've got multiple assets that you need to have on your screen. So this is just a little trick to keep in mind when you are making your assets for your game. You really want to pay attention to how many polygons you're putting into the engine. And this is a quick trick to just make sure it's low, is to use this Decimate modifier, and it will just help keep everything running more smoothly in your game so that you've lowered your number and your CPU isn't running as high. Whew! Okay, we did it. We got through everything. Thank you so much for sticking with me if you're still here. Hopefully you found some of those sections useful. I know this was a long video. Lots of content to cover in this. If you enjoyed it, give me a thumbs up. Consider subscribing, and thank you for your support. And speaking of support, thank you to all my patron supporters. Really appreciate it, guys. James Welch, Vince Fodor, Mr. Mike on a Bike, Lee Ching Ming, Denny's, and Mikal.